Okay, now the last and easternmost state to assume a place in European culture and diplomacy was Russia. And three aspects of Russia's geography had had a major impact on its history. So let's take a look here at Russia. So first of all, its location on a high northern latitude, far inland, it gave it a cold and dry climate. So cold and dry climate. So cold. Russia still today is very cold and dry. Okay. Its location on a high northern latitude and far inland gave it this cold and dry climate, and that combined with large areas of poor or mediocre soils. So poor, well, mediocre, but mostly poor soil. Now, and also a cold, dry steppe in which it is difficult to survive, let alone prosper. And we call this the steppe. So this is just a high plateau, a high plain. Now, famine has affected Russia on an average of 1 year out of 3 throughout its history. Now, second, so that's the first part. Second, Russia lies on the vast Eurasian steppe with no natural barriers, no formidable natural barriers, but it's pretty flat the whole way. No natural barriers, which has invited a number of invasions with tragic results. In its early history, the main threat came from the nomadic tribes to the east, making Russia a battleground between nomads and farmers. Only more recently have Russia's neighbors to the west been a serious threat, as seen by the loss of an estimated 27 million people in World War II. Now, ironically, Russia's harsh climate has saved it from invasion more than once. Napoleon and Hitler both found out the power of general winter when they made the mistake of trying to conquer this vast northern giant. And finally, Russia's inland location to the north and east of Europe has left it largely isolated from the mainstream of developing Western Europe. So isolation. Now, although Russia's geographic features have made a harsh land facing constant invasions, as a result, Russians have historically been torn between needing and wanting foreign ideas with which they could better compete and survive on the one hand, and a suspicion of foreigners bred by the continental threat of invasions they have faced on the other hand. Now, this love-hate relationship with foreign ideas has created recurring stress throughout Russian history, all the way to the present. In its early history, one can see 4 major stages of development where it has taken place. The first of these, when the first Russian state, centered on Kiev, was confronted with Byzantine influence from the south. The Cyrillic alphabet, Russian Orthodox Christianity, and Russian art and architecture all bear the distinctive marks of Byzantium. So I'll write these down here so we can have these. So first, our first threat we said was the Byzantine influence. Okay, so we had this Byzantine influence first. Byzantine influence. Now, the next major influence was that from the Mongols. So first we have Byzantine, which we brought, I said, alphabet and religion. Okay. The next we have the Mongols, who conquered Russia in the 1200s and introduced the harsh absolutism. So this is where we get absolutism in Russia because of the Mongol rule, which became a hallmark of later Russian government. The last 2 phases, the reigns of Ivan IV, so number 3, Ivan IV, and the 4th one being Peter I, witnessed growing influence from Western Europe. Ivan IV's reign saw the first attempt to gain access to the West for its technology, the use of Western artillery, and the conquest of 2 Mongol khanates, and the attempts to replace the traditional Russian nobility with a new nobility of service. While his efforts had only limited success, they did help set the stage for the more widespread concerted efforts of Peter I to westernize Russia. And despite the conservative backlash that followed Peter's reign, Russia from that time on was an integral part of Europe and European civilization. So now let's take a look at the early history of Russia until around 1725. So the earliest written references to inhabitants of Russia were the Scythians. This is the first group that's usually mentioned in here. So the Scythians. The Scythians, a nomadic horseman who inhabited the southern steppes in the time of classical Greeks. Now, Russia's grassy plains provided ideal grazing for these nomads. Sheep and horses was what they grazed. Sometime after 500 AD, various Slavic tribes, ancestors of most of today's Russians, moved in and settled down in Russia. Then around 900, Vikings known as the Rus, so Vikings, these are Vikings, we always have them everywhere. We have the Vikings known as the Rus, R-U-S, came in and united the Slavs under a state centered around Kiev. And if we look at this map, Kiev is located right here. So centered around Kiev. Now the Rus used Kiev and other Russian cities as bases from which to raid their more civilized neighbors to the south, in particular the Byzantines. And the first such raids were successful in forcing tribute from the emperors in Constantinople in order to make the Rus go home. Now later raids were met by the dreaded Greek fire, which set the Rus' navy and very sea itself ablaze. And in the wake of Greek fire came Byzantine missionaries, who converted the Rus and their Slavic subjects to Greek Orthodox Christianity. Now, Byzantine civilization has had a profound impact on Russian culture. Many Russians today still cling on to Orthodox faith in spite of over 70 years of communist disapproval. And the Cyrillic alphabet and the onion domes that grace the tops of the Kremlin also bear solid testimony of Byzantine influence on Russia to this day. Now, Russia's civilization and the Kievan state flourished until 1223, when the most devastating wave of nomadic invaders in history arrived, the Mongols. The Mongols arrived. In 1223, at the Kalka River, the Russian princes were overwhelmed by a small Mongol army whose numbers were exaggerated by panic and confusion to some 150,000 men. Europe itself was only spared Asia's fate by luck rather than prowess of its armies. Upon Genghis Khan's death, his far-flung hordes returned to the Mongol homeland to elect a new Khan. However, the Mongols returned to Russia in 1237 to finish its conquest. They even struck into Poland and Hungary, giving Europe a taste of things to come. Amazingly, fate intervened again when Genghis Khan's successor died. Thus Europe was spared a second time, and the incredible energy that had sent the Mongols to the corners of the known world started to fizzle out. However, Russia remained the western frontier of Mongol power. Now, Mongol rule was exercised directly through whichever Russian princes were most willing and able to carry out the will of their masters. This meant doing things in the rough and brutal Mongol way, so that after 2 centuries of Mongol rule, much of Mongol character and way of running a state rubbed off on their Russian vassals. The Mongols' expectation of blind obedience to authority and the use of such things as secret police, so the Mongols brought in blind, what did I say here? Blind obedience, and secret police. These were both Mongol style of governing to enforce their will, and also a postal system. Some positive, some negative things. A postal system, a relay rider system for better communications, and regular censuses. They would count the number of people in their areas, and even tax. This would also help with taxation. So, blind obedience, secret police, a postal system, and regular census to set up taxation became a major part of the Russian state that would later evolve. Now, the next aspect we'll be talking about is the most successful of the Russian vassals to adopt Mongol ruling methods were the princes of Muscovy, which is today Moscow, who earned the sole right to collect taxes and dispense justice for the Mongols. Now, while increasingly resembling their Mongol masters in their ruling and military techniques, eventually the Muscovite princes turned against their Mongol masters and ended their rule in 1390. And it was around Moscow that the modern state of Russia would form. And so we're going to be looking at this region here. I can't really see that color that well, but I'll make it in red just for now. This region is what we're looking at here, this region known as Muscovy. Now, Mongol rule was gone, but the Mongol terror was not. Nearly every year, the horsemen of various neighboring Khanates would ride in to spread a wide swath of death and destruction, taking thousands of Russian prisoners to the slave markets back home. These raids would depopulate whole regions of Russia, even Moscow itself being sacked by the Mongols 5 times between 1390 and 1571. Now, while destabilizing Russian society, these raids also forced the Muscovite princes to tighten their grip on society in order to provide better defense. Muscovite absolutism grew even stronger when the Metropolitan, or Patriarch, of the Russian Orthodox Church moved to Moscow, giving it claim to the title of the Third Rome. The Third Rome. So Rome number 1 being Rome number 2 being Constantinople, and now Moscow being the Third Rome. Now, likewise, Muscovite rulers laid similar claim to the title of Tsars. So Tsars, which comes from the word Caesar. And so they're carrying the title of Caesar, an old Roman title, with them to Moscow, calling themselves Tsars. Now, the first truly remarkable Tsar was that of Ivan IV. Ivan IV, known as Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV the Terrible. And he ruled from 1533 until 84. Now, Ivan's reign saw 4 momentous developments, all of which can be seen as growing efforts to bring in influence from Western Europe. So first, the destruction of the neighboring Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan to the south and east was made possible by the use of European artillery. So he brought in European artillery as a way to subdue areas around him. Artillery. European artillery, E-R-Y. European artillery. And although the Mongols of the Crimea still remained to carry out their depredations, destroying these other 2 Khanates did relieve the Russian people of some suffering from nomadic raids. It also opened the way for the rapid expansion of Russians eastward across Siberia, so moving eastward across in this direction, eastward, across Siberia to the Pacific in much the same way the United States would spread rapidly westward in the same oceans in the 1800s. Second was Ivan's long but unsuccessful war against Poland and Sweden to conquer Livonia and gain closer access to Western Europe. So this Livonia region, to get access this way into Western Europe. So he wanted to go west as well. Now, compounding this failure was the third development, the growing Orthodox Church. So 1, 2, 3, growing church power led to a lot of problems as well. Causing this was increased missionary activity by the Jesuits in the Ukraine and Eastern Baltic, and using Western scholarship and debates with the less educated Orthodox clergy, they were able to convert growing numbers of people in these regions. Now, naturally, the Orthodox clergy saw this as an especially serious threat to their religion and became the most ardent opponents of contact with the West. Finally, there was Ivan's fight against the boyars. The powerful Russian nobles. Blaming them for the death of his beloved wife, he launched a concerted campaign against them by setting up the Oprichnina, or state within a state, where Muscovy was split between the traditional state and his own Oprichnina. Now, Ivan then launched an 8-year reign of terror against anyone he suspected of disloyalty, and he also tried to replace the boyars with a new nobility of service that would be more subservient to the crown. Now, since Russia's economy was still quite backwards, the Tsar had to pay this service nobility with land worked by peasants. Consequently, many peasants fled to the freer lands of Siberia, now open for settlement by Ivan's wars. The government reacted with a series of laws that tied the free peasants to the soil and made them serfs. So we have the development of serfdom in Russia at this time. Now, Ivan's reforms and purges made his reign turbulent and a costly one. Now, Ivan's accidental slaying of his most able son in a fit of passion left the throne to the feeble-minded Fyodor, the son of Ivan, who liked to spend most of his time praying and ringing church bells. Now, the reins of government thus fell to the boyar Boris, typical nice Russian name, Boris Godunov. And this is a boyar, so one of these nobles, fell to Godunov, who succeeded Fyodor as Tsar in 1598. And at this point, everything in Russia seemed to go wrong at once. The boyars resisted his attempts to increase royal power. The Orthodox Church thwarted Boris's early attempts to bring Western European knowledge and culture to Russia. And worst of all, in 1601, a horrible drought and famine. So 1601, we have drought and famine. Drought and famine killed millions of peasants who revolted out of desperation and the belief that the famine was the Tsar's fault. Now the rebels got help from the Poles, from Poland, who supported a supposed son of Ivan IV as Tsar. Boris successfully defended his realm until, right on the verge of victory, he suddenly died, capping off a remarkably unlucky reign. The Poles had little better luck in holding the throne, their candidate being assassinated and replaced by another boyar, and more peasant revolts had another Polish invasion, which took Moscow, tore Russia further apart. Finally, the church managed to rally the people, drive out the Poles, and set up a stable government. A national assembly known as the Zemsky Sobor, set up a new dynasty known as the Romanovs. The Romanovs. However, the boyars were as independent and troublesome as ever, while increasing their hold on the serfs below. The church blocked any progressive reforms that it saw as irreligious, even making it illegal to play chess or gaze at the new moon. This was the condition of Russia when probably its greatest Tsar, Peter the Great, took the throne in 1682. So Peter the Great, who ruled from 1682 until 1725, is one of the most interesting characters in Russian history. An enormous man, 6 foot 8 inches tall, with incredible physical strength, he had a strong drive and will to match his physical stature. From an early age, Peter was fascinated with anything from Western Europe, especially technology. And he was an amateur clockmaker and dentist, and especially loved ships. Now, his early exposure to Western ways made him realize how backward Russia was compared to the rest of Europe. Therefore, he was determined that Russia should modernize, which meant it must westernize. So modernization, according to Peter, equals westernization. This was Peter's goal during this time period. Now, the first step was the Great Embassy, a grand tour of Europe where Peter traveled in disguise. So the Great Embassy, where Peter traveled through Europe and in disguise, and so he could experience its culture and technology more freely. Now, the huge Tsar's identity was the worst kept secret in Europe, but he did learn about such things as Prussian artillery and Dutch and English shipbuilding firsthand instead of from a distance. Now, in their wake, Peter and his wild entourage left a trail of ransacked houses and enough material to keep Europe gabbing for years about those wild northern barbarians. But Peter had also gained a much firmer understanding of European technology, further fueling his determination to bring it to Russia. Now, whether Russia wanted it or not, the subsequent transformation of Russia is known as the Petrine Revolution. So this is what he tried to accomplish, the Petrine Revolution. Now, Peter first had to secure better communication with the West. At this time, Poland and Sweden effectively blocked such contact in order to keep Russia backwards and at their mercy. Peter's determination to end Russia's isolation and gain a window to the West, as he called it, led to the Great Northern War with Sweden. This was a desperate life-and-death struggle for both Sweden in its attempt to stay a great power, and for Russia in its effort to become one. Now, despite the brilliance of Sweden's brilliant warrior king, Charles XII, Russia's superior resources and manpower, along with its winter, wore out the Swedes. Now, the Swedish meteor, which had burned so brightly in the 1600s, was quickly fading away, and in its place, the Russian giant started to cast its huge shadow westward and make Europe take note that a new power had arrived. Now, Peter's new capital and window to the west was St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg. Its location was less than ideal, being on marshy land about 25 miles from the sea up the Neva River, and in a high northerly attitude that gave up to 19 hours of sunlight a day. Now, in the summer, as little as 5 hours a day in the winter. Stone for the city had to be brought in on the backs of laborers, since there were no wheelbarrows, and as a result, thousands of laborers died while building this new capital, which legend said was built on the bones of the Russian people. Now, meanwhile, Peter's other reforms left hardly anything untouched. He more tightly centralized the government and built up a more modern army, navy, and merchant marine along European lines. He dealt with his main obstacle to reform, the Orthodox Church, by not electing a new patriarch when the old one died. And without effective leadership, the church could do little to fight Peter's reforms. And after 21 years of this, Peter appointed a council, or Holy Synod, which made the church little more than a dependent state, or department of state, Peter tried to westernize the economy by first creating mines to develop the resources needed for industry. So he tried to increase mining and create mining. And by 1721, Russia had gone from an iron importer to an iron exporter. He brought in Western cobblers to teach Russians how to make Western-style shoes. Anyone refusing was threatened with life on the gallows, or on the galleys, of the ships. And as a result of Peter's strict measures, Russian industries grew, and with them an industrial serfdom, tied to their jobs as much as the way the peasants were tied to the soil. Peter also worked to build up commerce and a middle class like that he saw in Western Europe. He raised the status of merchants to encourage more men to take up trade, and started an extensive canal-building program that connected rivers and made water transport possible between the Baltic and Black Seas. Peter tried to westernize people's lifestyles as well. He updated the alphabet and changed the calendar to get more in line with that of the West. He established newspapers, libraries, and Western-style schools, imported music, theater, and art from the West, and imposed European fashions upon Russian people. Even beards were taxed, and this is what this picture is showing right here. Even beards were taxed because they were not in style of Europe. Now, by Peter's death, Russia's economy and culture were starting to look much more Western. However, many of these reforms were superficial, touching only the nobles or a limited part of the economy. For one thing, such widespread and comprehensive reforms would naturally cause a good deal of resistance and turmoil in such a traditional society as Russia. Therefore, after Peter died, there was a serious reaction against his reforms in an effort to go back to the old ways. However, Peter, by the force of his character, had so thoroughly exposed Russia to the West that there was no turning back. And from this point on, like it or not, Russia was a part of Europe.